What's going on, guys? Hyper here, and this video is a mini guide for Mythic Plus as a Blood DK. Now this guide will assume that you already know how to play Blood DK, you know how to press the buttons, what the cooldowns do, what everything in your toolkit does. And this will just kind of give you some tips and tricks and some general guidelines for higher level Mythic Pluses. I should have probably made this video a long time ago, but I'll be honest, I never really pushed high keys as Blood DK until recently. And I also assumed that there was already something like this out there, but when I searched for it, I couldn't really find anything that's in video format. I found some great written stuff, which I will link in the description box, but for video, there's not much out there. So I decided to help you guys out and share my knowledge that I've acquired recently about Mythic Plus. First of all, let's go over the talents. There's two different setups, whether or not you're doing high keys or low keys. I consider anything below a 20 a low key, but if you're maybe not used to doing high keys, then maybe an 18 or below would be considered a low key. So for this, we would run Blood Drinker, Rapid Decomp, Ossuary, Red Thirst, Tightening Grasp, Foul Bulwark, and Bone Storm. So this is very default. Bone Storm just helps you on those big AoE packs, and then all of the other talents are pretty default. Tightening Grasp, you just run that by default in every single Mythic Plus just because of the cooldown and the slow, or the cooldown reduction that is, and the slow on your D&D. For higher keys, so anything 20 and above, I would run Blood Drinker, and then in the second row, you either run Rapid Decomp or Spectral Deflection based on how hard you're getting hit. Maybe if you don't have defensive trinkets, you might want to consider running Spectral Deflection. If you have some very good defensive trinkets, then you're probably fine and you can get away with running Rapid Decomp. Then in the third row, Ossuary, then Red Thirst, then Tightening Grasp, but those are still standard. And then in the level 90 row, you have the choice between Foul Bulwark and Rune Tap. Most of the dungeons, Foul Bulwark will be what you will be running, but there's a few where Rune Tap is very, very useful. And the higher keys you do, the more useful it becomes. Maw of Souls is a great example for this, where the first boss on higher keys absolutely trucks you. And with Rune Tap, you actually can make that boss a lot easier than some other tanks can. So most of the time, again, Foul Bulwark is your go-to, especially if you're doing within like the range of 20 to maybe 23, 24. Anything above that, you want to run Rune Tap for sure. And then in the last row, you want to run Purgatory. Now this talent has saved me many, many times, and especially if you're running with a Holy Paladin, this talent is extremely useful because you can just get Lay on Hands out of it. Otherwise, you can just Vamp Blood and double Death Strike and you should be able to heal out of it. And you can also use it as a defensive cooldown where you proc it on purpose. For example, again, coming back to Maw of Souls, for the first or the second Dark Slash, I believe it's called, I just let my perk pop and then I just get healed out of it. So it's just another cooldown that's added to your toolkit. Next, let's go over stats and itemization. So you will want to still stack haste verse items, those are ideal, but crit also has very great value when it comes to DPS. Mastery is kind of the lowest, so your overall stat balance would be haste over verse over crit over mastery. Haste verse are great stats both defensively and offensively. It's a little bit below crit when it comes to offense, but the higher keys you do, the more you will find that defensive stats will become much more prevalent. As far as tier goes, I use tier 21 2-piece and then tier 20 2-piece as well. The tier 21 2-piece is actually really good, so the one out of Antorus, because you can Dancing Rune Weapon very, very often. And that gives you a lot of extra shields. I will show you a Vampiric Blood trick later in this video, so you'll understand why I'm saying that. Because of the DRW, you get more shields, and you also output more damage, and it's a great defensive tool as well. Now, the 4-piece is not that great, to be honest, and not too useful, because usually you're at high enough haste already, where it doesn't really matter that you get that 10% extra. So I'd rather run the tier 20 2-piece, which is the 2500 versatility, which is great. Now, ideally, you will want to use tier 21 gloves and legs, and then tier 20 helmet cloak. But this will come down to what item level pieces you have and how you can kind of fit the puzzle together to get the best stats and best overall item level out of this. Now, with the stat weights, again, I want to mention that item level is very important as well. So if you have a 970 item that maybe is not ideally statted versus like a 930 that is ideally statted, you definitely want to choose the higher item level. Ideal stats are only worth about 10 item level in my book. Now for the tier 20 pieces, most I sacrifice is about 40 item levels. I wouldn't go anything over that because you're just losing out on way too many stats. And that's about how much 2500 versatility is worth. So for example, if I had a 960 cloak and then a 930 tier 20 cloak, then I would use the 930 tier 20. Next, let's go over gear sets. So depending on the affixes and the level of the key, there are a few different gear sets that you should have saved. And in these, I will only mention the legendaries you should be using because I will dedicate a whole section to the trinkets. So first of all, you will want to have a single target defensive set where you use the shoulders and the bracers. This will be mostly for bosses that hit hard and you can also sustain yourself and are mostly single target, so you can get the benefit from the shoulders. The second set you should have saved is a single target offensive set, which is Archimonde's Hatred Reborn along with the shoulders. And I know you're probably thinking that Archimonde's is a defensive trinket, but the damage it deals single target whenever the shield expires is actually a great DPS gain. And I will give you again a trick to using this later in the video. You can also use this set on bosses such as first boss of Maw of Souls, where you just use Archimonde's Hatred as a defensive cooldown because on that boss you kind of need a lot of defensive cooldowns. The third set is a defensive AoE set. So for this you would run the belt and then Sephuz. This is probably the overall best survival set that you can have because you can Vampiric Blood very often. And in Mythic Plus, you'll be proccing Sephuz every time, basically, on a cooldown. So this set I use mostly on higher keys, so 22 and above. I tend to run this set on every single trash pack. And then the other set that you have is an AoE offensive set. We'll be running the chest legendary along with Sephuz. This gives us a lot of extra damage, and again, Sephuz is just great for proccing that extra haste. Now, this set is also very good for big pulls where you have to kite. A pull that comes in mind instantly is Neltharion's Lair. Whenever you're doing that long corridor before the second boss, where you want to kite away from the pelters, because if you're not in range of them, then no one gets hit. So with the chest, you will be able to hold aggro and also heal yourself for a little extra without being in range of them. The last set, which you should definitely have saved, is a speed set. Now, a lot of Mythic Plus time is wasted by running around and not doing anything, so having a speed set kind of cuts down on that time. For my speed set, I use boots and Sephuz, and then I stack as much haste as humanly possible. So I have 18.5k haste, which is 52%. Just base, and then on top of that, whenever you have the bone shield up, you get extra haste, and then when you proc Sephuz and Wraith Walk, you get a lot of extra haste and movement speed. In this set, I only have one item that actually gives speed, and I'm still able to get up to 266% movement speed whenever I press Wraith Walk and I have Sephuz going. Now, most of the time you won't have Sephuz going because you will be proccing it on trash, but still you're able to get to a very high amount of movement speed just by having high haste and then using these two legendaries. Now that we talked about the legendaries, let's talk about trinkets a little bit. First category, I will just put Aman'Thul's Vision in a category of its own because it's the best trinket, offensive, defensive, utility, you name it. This trinket is above everything, but since very few people have it, I don't want to just put it in with the rest of the trinkets as a trinket you should have. So the first category is defensive trinkets. Shivermaw's Jawbone is probably the strongest AoE defensive trinket in the game, and it is very difficult to get. You can pretty much only get it out of your weekly chest, or if you get lucky with the relinquished trinkets. but it's very useful for big packs. Anything when you're hitting about 3 targets or more, it becomes very, very strong because of the versatility, the burst of damage, and the slow that it provides. Then the second trinket is Dima's Glacial Aegis, which drops from the Coven of Shivara in Antorus. And this is probably the strongest single target defensive trinket. So I would use Shiver Maws, of course, on AoE, on hierarchies, and then Dima's for single target. And then third, we have Agrimar's Conviction, which is the trinket, the tank trinket that drops from Argus. And this is a strong offensive and defensive trinket, and it's also very high item level if you have it upgraded all the way to 1000, so it gives you great stats. Then the fourth here, we have Riftworld Codex, which drops from Portal Keeper. And this is again a great defensive and offensive trinket, depending on which portals you're proccing, and it gives you great self-sustain. And it's especially useful in AoE situations. Single target, it's a little bit less optimal, but it can still help you out quite a bit. Next, for offensive trinkets, we have, of course, Umbral Moonglaves. Now, these are probably the best burst AoE trinkets in the game, and it drops from the sister bosses in TOS. So if you can get a 930 or above, which is the Mythic base eye level, then this trinket will do wonders for you. Honestly, any big pulls where you need burst of damage, you can just mass grip and then drop these trinkets, then drop like a root. And you can also use it together with Shiver Maws Jawbone. So you can proc that high amount of versatility along with the Moonglaves, and it's just a huge burst of damage. Then second, we have Terrorbound Nexus. This again is a great AoE trinket, but it's more sustained AoE rather than burst AoE. And also, again, it's a little more difficult to get since it drops out of Mythic Plus. Now for the third offensive trinket, I have Eye of Command, which is a very strong single target DPS trinket because of the high amount of stats it gives, and you can pretty much keep it up 100% of the time. I didn't really mention Dark Moon deck, which is the Dark Moon Fair Immortality trinket, tanking trinket that gives you armor. But this trinket is also very useful. I will put this again in the defensive category. If you don't have those trinkets mentioned above, which I actually don't have Shiver Maws or Dima's yet, sadly, I actually end up using the Dark Moon deck Immortality in most situations whenever I need more survival. Now, in Mythic Plus, there's a few things which you should have whenever you enter. Obviously, Prolonged Power, Feast, and Health Stones, or if you're running with the Lock, then Cookies. But other than that, I also suggest using Skystep potions and Avalanche potions. Avalanche, not as common, but Skystep is very useful in a lot of dungeons where you need to do big pulls, and they're kind of spread out. So you can just Skystep, and if you didn't know this, you can still press abilities while you're Skystepped. So you can be hitting the targets and applying Blood Boil to everything and kiting around. And you can gather up large groups of mobs very quickly using that potion. Then Avalanche Potion, obviously very useful for skipping elevators. And a Skaggle Drink, you can go invis. So some pulls, such as Blackrook Hold, you can either go with the invis strat, or you can go with the sacrifice strat or the death run. It depends on just what you choose. Now, I have a few tips and tricks to give you guys as far as cooldowns go and then trinket usage. So first of all, Archimons, which is the defensive/offensive single target trinket. If you use Vampiric Blood, then you use Archimons, then the Vampiric Blood bonus, so the 50%, or if you have relics for it, then however much percent gets applied to the trinket Absorb. And then that also gets applied to the damage it deals, because if the shield was bigger, then the damage it deals will be bigger. So if you're trying to use this trinket for damage, then you should definitely Vampiric Blood, then use the trinket. Now, if you're trying to use this trinket defensively, such as first boss of Maw Souls again, just using Vampiric Blood is probably a big enough cooldown for you to survive. And then you can use the trinket on its own with like a Rune Tap or an AMS or something else, or an Icebound together to survive another hit. Pairing them together is typically a huge overkill, and it's probably not worth it if you're just going straight for defensive values. But again, if you know that there's going to be a huge hit perhaps, then you can Vampiric Blood along with the Trinket for the huge shield. The second and probably most useful tip is the Umbilicus Eternus usage. Now, if you don't know what this is, it's one of our artifact traits. Whenever we have Vampiric Blood running, some of the damage that we do with our Blood Plague, which is the dot that gets applied by Blood Boil, gets converted into a shield whenever our Vampiric Blood runs out. But this buff that we get is actually separated from Vampiric Blood, so we can cancel it early to get our shield applied faster. So if you're in a pinch, for example, and you already have your dots rolling on everything, and maybe you're about to get hit and you might die, you can use a cancelaura macro, which I will again have linked in the description box, to cancel your Umbilicus Eternus early and get the shield. Now this will give you a smaller shield, but it might just save your life. And also another thing you can do is cancel Umbilicus Eternus right before your Vampiric Blood runs out. So the later the better. I usually aim for canceling it at about half a second remaining on Vampiric Blood, and that way the beneficial effects from Vampiric Blood, so the healing increase and the shield increase, gets applied to Umbilicus Eternus. So your shield is effectively 50% or even more stronger than it should be. And here in the background, you probably are seeing a clip of me on the first boss of Maw Souls, where all of the ads spawn and I cancel my Vampiric Blood early, or my Umbilicus Eternus early, and then I get a massive shield on me. That's pretty much all I have for the Blood DK guide. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you're trying to get some more in-depth and detailed information, please go to the description box where I will have a link to Now's guide on Wowhead. He wrote an absolutely fantastic guide where he goes in very, very specific details about legendaries, trinkets, and goes as far as giving you tips for specific dungeons and specific affixes. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you have time to read through that. Again, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and sub to the channel, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Legend Hyperion. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.